So today we have a 2015 Honda CR-V. It's here for some brake work, but it's also here because there's a multitude of warning lights on the dash. I'm going to start this vehicle here and we'll have a look at the warning lights that are on it, and then we're going to put a scanner on it and see what's going on. So here we go to start it. A little bit of a rattle from it could indicate possible timing chain issues or timing chain tensioner. So we have a traction control light, we have the wrench light, we have a check engine light, we have a TPMS light flashing. She says that her cruise control doesn't work now that these lights have been on. She's been driving it now for probably close to a month with these lights on. So we're going to do a network scan on this thing and see what codes it's generating. So I have a record on this vehicle, and I scanned it a couple of years ago, and there were no codes related to anything except the tire pressure monitors. I suspect it doesn't have any TPMS sensors in it. I'm sure it's had tires changed since then. But nevertheless, so here we go. We're going to do a network scan on this thing. Got the ignition in the run position, engine not running. Wait for it to auto ID. Should auto ID. There it is, 2.4 dual overhead cam. And we're going to do a network code scan. And it's a pre-scan. So this network scan will take a few seconds, so I'll pause this recording. Okay, so here we have the network scan results. P0341 cam sensor A, crank sensor incorrect phase. So it has a cam timing problem. Could be stretch timing chain, could be VVT solenoid, or the VVT mechanism that's not advancing or retarding the camshaft correctly. This electric power steering VS85-1 is, I believe, to be related to the engine control code. Low tire pressure, we're going to check the tires, but I'm sure it doesn't have sensors in there. Anti-lock brake ECM failure, this U code is related to the P0341, I believe. And then there are a bunch of codes in the body control module for power unit ignition A circuits. Now this thing has an aftermarket car starter, and it still starts the vehicle, and that's likely what's generating these codes. So we're not going to worry about those. Attempt to diagnose them. You can see they're in all of the modules related to the body. Keyless access power control unit, and then the OBD2 code of P0341. So we're going to have a look at what sets P0341 and go from there. So here's a case on Identifix for 14 CR-V, which is the same, suggesting to change the oil and clear the codes and see if it resets. It is in need of a service, so we're going to have a look at the oil quality and volume in the crankcase. But it could be a sticking VTC solenoid, so they suggest to remove it and see if it will click. But we're going to try the onboard diagnostics to see if we have the ability to command the solenoid on and off, and we can hear it clicking. Now that doesn't mean it's moving, but if it doesn't make any sound, that would be a giveaway. So we're going to go into the engine control computer and into functional tests and see if there's the option to command the VTC solenoid on and off. We'll pick up when we get there. So there is an option to do a VTC test, but if you read the criteria, it says it activates the test in 3 stages and monitors the position from input voltage of the cam sensor against the target angle commanded by the ECM PCM. It says there can be an actual difference of 3 to 5 degrees, but the bottom line is this test will not execute if other codes are set. So that's common with a lot of the systems. If there's a code set for the VTC or cam synchronization, it won't allow you to run the test, so that makes bidirectional. And this test is running. I wanted to do it with key on, engine off. Now there is a vtec test. I didn't read this one yet. It's an automatic. Let's see if that solenoid valve actuation, let's try that. The following test will manually activate the vtec solenoid. Listen to the solenoid clicking. That's exactly what we want to do. Continue. Continue to toggle the state of the solenoid valve and listen to it. Solenoid on, solenoid off, solenoid on. I can hear it from here, which is a bad sign. I was hoping that it was going to be stuck. So we're going to clear the codes, check the oil, possibly do an oil change, and see how it, if anything, persists. So it turns out I was actually commanding on the vtec solenoid, not the VTC solenoid. So the vtec solenoid clicks, but that's, you know, variable intake cam lobe lift with the the higher lobe lift in between the two basic intake cam lobes and the locking pins that connect the intake medium rocker arm follower to the intake rocker arms. That solenoid's working, but there's no means of commanding the VTC solenoid that I can see. I've cleared the code. The oil doesn't look bad. It is due for a service. I don't think it's oil quality that's causing the problem, and I don't see a way to command the actual VTC solenoid. I'll show you where that is, because I had a picture of it. VTC actuator. Well, there's the actuator and the solenoid. They're kind of two separate things. It's right on the center of the camshaft. Component locations. All-wheel drive. You've got the same picture here. Yeah, it's right dead center. So I don't see a means of commanding it on with the scan tool. I'm not sure if Honda Diagnostics will do that. So we're going to remove it and test it out of the vehicle. Well, it kept aborting because we kept increasing the RPM too high, and it wasn't stable. So we're going to go back in to see if it set any codes. No, it hasn't. Let's have a look at the cam timing. I think it's in powertrain data. I'll bring up a code list. So I'm looking at the VTC solenoid duty cycle in the command, and I'm not seeing any change, so I'm wondering if it's got a pending code. Yes, it does. So that's why it's not operating. All right, we're going to test that solenoid. So support the bottom of the engine with a jack stand and a block of wood, because you have to remove the motor mount from this area. And here you can see the VTC solenoid right here, and this looks like the timing actuator right here, but we're going to take this solenoid out and put power and ground to it and see if it physically clicks. Aside from that, once you get that motor mount out of the way, which is right there, there's a considerable amount of room to access it. We're hoping. So here's the VTC solenoid out of the vehicle, out of the engine. Just one 10 mil fastener here, and gently grab the outside of the housing. Don't grab the connector, you'll break it off. Grab the outside of the housing with a pair of angled needle nose and give it a little twist and pull. Just one O-ring there. I see some microscopic filings in here. Try and zoom in on that. So there's some debris on the screen, and I've got it hooked up to a a button here so that I can put power and ground to it, and as you can see, it moves. So it's definitely not sticking. So that's a bad sign. That's definitely a bad sign. It could mean that the solenoid or the valve that this thing sends the oil pressure to is stuck or sticking, or it could be just that the timing chain is worn out, in fact, and it needs a new timing chain. This thing's got 110,000 kilometers on it, which is a shame for a Honda. So remove the timing cover with a whole bunch of 10mm bolts, remove the coils, loosen off the harness, disconnect the alternator, disconnect the negative battery post, and you can see there's a considerable amount of play in the chain in this thing. In fact, if I turn it, I can make it jump. There, I just made it jump across the exhaust cam, one tooth. So this thing's going to need a timing chain, guides. I'm not sure what it uses as a tensioner, but we'll see what the typical components are to replace when you do this job. So we're ready to start changing this timing chain on this 2016 or 15 CRV. And I've lined up the crank mark. Here's a pointer, a white mark on the balancer. Actually, there's two white marks. Better figure out which one it is, because it's not timed right now. That's one. There's one white mark there. There's one white mark there. I think it's the next one. Okay, so I think I've got it lined up to the white mark on the balancer and the pointer at the back there. You can see that arrow pointing down. Now the cam sprockets should be lined up, and they're not, because this chain has got so much slack in it. When I turned it before, it jumped on the exhaust cam. So this timing dot here should be straight up, but it's jumped. And this one, this line here, should be straight across and parallel with this line. So this exhaust cam is jumped a couple teeth, but you can see how much slack is in the chain here. And I had taken this tensioner, or this guide, off, and that allowed the chain to jump on the exhaust cam. So we're going to take it apart at that position right there, but we're going to make sure these marks are lined up when we put it back together. Okay, so you'll need a holding fixture to remove the harmonic balancer after you remove the serpentine belt. So I have a custom built one here to hold this, because that crank bolt is very tight, and typically an impact gun won't loosen it. Remove the variable valve timing solenoid and the variable lift solenoid assembly off the front, the serpentine belt tensioner pulley, and then the lower crank pulley. Then there are several bolts, 3 bolts from the bottom of the oil pan that have to come out, and then the bottom bolts from here. Now we're going to lower it. I'm supporting the engine with a chain and a block of wood here, as you can see. There's no real place to put a lifting fixture, or at least not a universal lifting fixture, on the top of the engine to hold it up, because you've got the front motor mount off. I think we're going to drop it now and access the bolts from the top. So there are 18 bolts in the timing cover. 2 of them have special shoulders on them, and they actually go in the 3rd location from the bottom. I'll show you that when we're putting it back together again. 3 bolts in the bottom of the timing cover from the oil pan. They're all the same length, except these 2 have shoulders on them. Then there's the 12mm bolts and 1 long one. It's pretty self-explanatory where they all go. So there's the timing cover off. We have new O-rings to go in these locations here, new seals here, and there is 1 bolt that's hidden from looking at it at the top. You can't see it. It's in this location here, so don't forget that one. So let's see, there's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 19, 20, 21 bolts total. So don't try and pull the cover off until you've got all the bolts out. So make sure the crankshaft sprocket is lined up with that timing mark that you can see there, and we'll worry about the camshafts after. This is the oil chain, or timing chain tensioner, hydraulic tensioner. We have a new one of these, so we're going to remove that. We have new guides and a new chain and a new VCT actuator for the, I guess that's the intake camshaft. Yeah, intake cam. So I went with OEM parts. Here's the VCT actuator, new timing chain, 2 guides, valve cover gasket, tensioner, hydraulic tensioner, and then some O-ring seals that we need for the back of the valve, or the back of the timing cover. So we're ready to clean up everything. I have to take this VCT actuator off of the intake cam. There's a hex on the back of the intake cam. Looks like I could use a wrench to hold it back there to remove that bolt. So there's a colored link on the crank sprocket, and there's a dot. I put a white paint dot there where the dot is, so that's where the bottom link goes. I used a bungee cord, as you can see here, to hold this timing chain tensioner. Before I pull the pin on it, I'm going to make sure it's lined up top. I just put a bungee cord on it to hold light pressure on there, because it's pretty hard to keep this chain from jumping because it's got so much slack in it without the tensioner applied. So before I pull this pin, I'm going to check the marks up top. Okay, so it looks like it's lined up top here. I'll try to get in here. You can see on the exhaust cam there's a colored link and a dot, and on the intake cam are 2 colored links, and the arrows in between, or the dots in between. Now I still have to torque up the upper pivot on the cam tensioner there, chain tensioner, but these other 2 lines here, this one here and this one here, should be right across from each other with a straight edge. And it looks like it's timed, so we can take the pin out of the tensioner now and continue assembling. So there's the timing cover back together. The bolts are 9 foot-pounds. I can't remember what the larger one's in. I'll type it in the comments. This crank bolt, if you reuse it, it's 37 foot-pounds and then 90 degrees. You have to use a holding fixture. Don't use an impact gun on it. Aside from that, I used a small tube of RTV sealant, and I put the bead of sealant on the block. It's a little bit tedious, but trying to slide that timing cover down there and not disturb the sealant on the timing cover would be difficult, so I put it on the block in the oil pan and then put everything together. So we'll continue reassembly. So there it is, back together and running again. No more check engine light. We've got to clear the codes from the computer history. I've changed the oil and filter. Just got to check the fluid levels, put the tire back on. Should be good to go. Thanks for watching.